You have to be able to regulate your emotions while you're doing the job. You have to recognize your limitations. You have to understand your triggers, what's going to set you off. Any little thing can just derail stuff. So you have to try and think ahead. You have to have a backup plan, just like in police work. You anticipate the possibilities, you act on the probabilities, you have a backup plan, you think ahead. What would I do if?
The world will never judge you based on your intent. The world will only ever judge you based on what your words, actions, and behaviors communicate. Even if their intent is aligned, if their words, actions, or behaviors do not, they won't be trusted, they won't be believed, and it will be rejected.
A child was walking in a crosswalk, and the guy that hit him, he was in a lifted truck. I get there at the scene, and there's this little bicycle, and then there's the blood. When I got home, he's still out riding his bicycle outside. And I got home, and I yelled at him. I said, "Put your bike away and go inside." And my wife says...
Welcome back to Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here by now. We like to have the real, raw conversations about the things that really happen to us in life, the stories and the journeys, not just the highlight reels. And we typically do it with some of the most influential and impactful people in this world. And that means a whole variety of different things. But our guest today has quite an extensive background, had the opportunity to have him on my live show. And what's really beautiful about this person is so much of his career was actually spent on diffusion and creating emotional safety and communication and connection. He spent a lifelong career in homicide, in negotiations, in team structures, and now he works at the district attorney's office in California, but also with a lot of purpose and mission between his books and really help people understanding the why behind behavior in people. He's got a really interesting story, and he's made a lot of impact, and he's still just getting started. So, Chris, I'm so happy to have you here with us today, my friend.
Well, thanks for letting me be here. That was an incredible intro. I almost cried.
Wow, man. Well,
thank you.
I'm going to say thank you, and I fully receive that. But to the point that it almost cried, I want to pause there for a second.
Well,
what hit you about what I said?
You know, you think about all that stuff that happened and all the experiences. And it's like, damn, man, that was a lot of stuff. And when I think about a lot of those things that happened, a lot of it is worth crying over. But
yeah,
you know, I really appreciate the acknowledgement for that. That was cool.
Well, I mean, here's the reality. I don't think that everybody fully appreciates the intensity of the type of work that you have committed your life to. And we're going to get into that, and we're going to unpack that in just a second. But, you know, so much of even what I teach people is just this concept to be able to live in a way that we do no longer need to justify, protect, or defend, right? To live in an unprotected state so that we have the chance to really see what's happening and connect, right? But yet there's a lot in this world that causes us the need to protect. And yet sometimes when we're also in threat, it's really difficult to not only regulate our own emotions and the threat of risk, but to deregulate whatever's coming at us. And it's a special and unique skill to be able to diffuse, which is the only reason, honestly, I highlighted it so focused in the intro, because that's what I see. And it takes a special person to do that. The only question I ask everybody on this show, and it's the same question I ask everybody on the other show. So you've answered it once already, but this will be different, I'm sure, just contextually. Outside of whoever I've described you to be or whatever I've described you do, Chris, who are you in your words?
I'm a dad. I'm a grandpa, a new grandpa.
Congrats.
I'm a husband. I'm the garbage taker outer. I'm the go-getter when we need stuff. You know, I feel like I'm just the average guy. I just go do what I need to do. You know, whatever it is.
I find that some of the biggest heroes in our world are ones that just say, I'm an average guy or an average gal, right? And so frequently that happens on this show. But what I also am really grateful for is you had zero confusion in how to answer that question. And frankly, it had nothing to do with what you do.
Right.
And that's exactly why I asked it the way I did. But the fact that you even listened to it with the language that you did and didn't instinctually reply with what you do or how the world sees you.
Right.
By the way, I often say I'm a husband and father first and only. It's the only thing binary in my world. Everything else is secondary.
Yeah.
Right. Because that is so much of who I am. And that includes taking out the garbage too. I have that job in my house also.
Yeah.
But my friend, it's grounded in what's most important to you. And so what I'd like to understand before we get into the depth of what you do, take us back earlier in your life and in your development. right? What put you on the path that you spent 30 years of your career helping diffuse complicated situations and teach people how to better connect with each other?
A lot of error, a lot of bad. I don't say bad choices, but things that happen. You know, life has a way of getting involved, and you make the plan to go this way, and life takes you a different direction. My plan was to go in the Navy and be in the Navy for the rest of my life. Well, I got to the Navy and the Navy said, "Oh, did you know that your dad brought you to Balboa Hospital when you were a year old and you have asthma?" I go, "No, I don't." They go, "No, yeah, you do." And so I look at this doctor, a Navy doctor who's a captain, right? And I'm just a little peon recruit. And I go, "Okay, Captain, well," he goes, "well, you can stay in the Navy and pay for it all on your own, or you can get out as enlisted in errors, no harm, no foul." I said, "Well, you're a captain in the Navy. What would you do?" And he said, "I'll start your paperwork. You'll be out in about a week." And it was like, wow, man, you know, and then I come back to Modesto. I come back to where I left, thinking I had left forever. And I come back and I go to my old boss, get my old job back. And then I figure, you know, I got to do something. And I thought, they're always going to need cops. They're always going to need firemen. Fire just scares the hell out of me. You can't talk to it. You can't negotiate with it. You can't, nothing, right? It just burns and it comes after you and it does it fast. And so I said, okay, I'd rather deal with somebody with a shotgun than fire. So it was like, okay, I'll try this police academy thing. At the time, you either were sponsored by a department and went in. It was very rare for people to put themselves through an academy. And I said, well, I'm going to put myself through the academy. So I was one of 2 independents in my class. And as I was doing that, I was applying for every different department in the state. I had an opportunity to go to Monterey Police Department, but if I'd have left to go to the interview, if I'd have left the academy to go to the interview, the academy director said, I wouldn't certify that you finished the academy, which means I couldn't be a cop in Monterey. And so it's like, okay, now what? You know? So now I'm stuck here. I feel like it's like, okay, now what? And then I got, because I'd applied everywhere, I got an offer from Kern County and I got an offer from Modesto PD. Modesto PD was to start as a community service officer. Kern County was to start as a deputy, more pay, but I'd have to spend 3 years in the jail. Okay, my whole teen years, it was trying to stay out of jail. So the last thing I want to do is go into jail, right? And I don't want to work in a jail. I don't want to, you know. So I said, okay, I'll try this CSO thing with Modesto PD. And then they took me on because I finished the academy. They took me on as a CSO and a reserve. So I got to do both jobs. And then they hired me as a regular, and that's how. So it was a lot, like I say, it was mistakes and people say, and life taking the turns. I made a plan, but that plan didn't pan out. My other plan didn't pan out. But, you know, looking back now, it all panned out.
Yeah. You know, I'm a believer that typically things happen the way they're supposed to, regardless of what our intention is. I do think we have influence and we have choice. Like we really do. We have an element of agency, but so much of what you even just said is life happens, right? I mean, and change is guaranteed and it's always going to happen. And one of the concepts I teach as well is that, you know, the only time we really have waste in our lives, the only time we get stuck is when we stop asking questions. Right. Like we stop, we don't have options and opportunities. We don't have things. And I always relate it back to probably the greatest lesson my dad ever taught me, which is that no matter what, always guaranteed in life, we have a minimum of 2 choices. Now, the example I've given in many situations when I talk about this is that they may both be shitty choices. You could be held up at gunpoint and your choice is to be shot or hand over your worldly possessions. But with the power of questions, it potentially opens up more opportunities, right? What if we could neutralize and diffuse the person that's in front of us? What if we could operate with compassion and give them something they need or give them the help that they might need, even though that we're in threat, right? But like that, to do that, it requires us to pause and realize that we're safe. The reason I obviously went down that just basic example is that's literally what you did with your entire career.
Yeah.
Is take situations that seemed binary and tried to find other alternatives.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's sometimes intuitive and sometimes it's trained and sometimes it's conditionally conditioned based on our lives. For you, when you look at your life, your job, your development, when you say, man, I just kind of fell into it because of the opportunities that opened up, right? How do you pick that up and embrace it with such tenacity that you become one of the best in the business and can teach others at levels like the FBI and others hostage negotiations and people skills?
Well, I'm not the only one.
You're right.
Start out with that. Is that there's thousands and thousands of cops doing that every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't hold myself above any of them because they're continuing on the fight. So that's the thing, is that you get into it and it's that purpose-driven motive is what you want. In the book Drive, talk about motive, right? What causes people to do something and purpose is one of those. And if you look at the purpose, that's really, for me, that was the whole thing, is if I can make a difference in someone else's life, then it's successful. And part of that is my own life, my kids' lives, my wife's lives, all of those things. I have to make a difference in their lives too, and be successful in the job I'm doing. If I screwed up or messed up or whatever and get laid off, that doesn't help anybody. So part of it is survival. You said contextual. I think of it as situational. Each situation presents its own. That's part of the leadership process. It's the context. Leader follower context, and so the context is a lot of times determines everything. And sometimes you have to do things the way they do them, and sometimes you get to do them, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, a lot of it was purpose and being able to get that purpose completed. That's kind of what I think is what drove me anyway. And I know that's the same for a lot of people, especially people in law enforcement. When you lose that purpose, it's time to leave. It really is. Yeah.
I mean, I'm an advocate that I believe that in every category of life, if we're not like energetically connected to something, right, in a way that's bigger than just going through it for the motions, then it's probably time to revisit that in our lives. And so I think that's a great statement. I have to reflect back to you, whether you like it or not, that I really appreciate the humility when you say I'm not the only one and there's many still activating the fight. And that is true. And I agree with you. And I want to honor all of them as well. Yeah. But today's interview is not about them. It's about you. And Thank you. The challenge I'm giving back to you is the fact that I hope that you'll be able to lean into and own the impact that you yourself have had in this role, not only because of the work that you've done in the field, but because of all of the work you've done to help prepare more of those thousands that are still doing it to be ready and prepared in the field. And so I have a really difficult time sitting here and saying, Chris, cool. Yes, I accept that. And it's about you also. And so, I appreciate the humility, but that's where I'm going to challenge you for the rest of this episode is it's like, cool. We got that covered now. We don't need to say that anymore. Okay. Let's focus on the badass shit that you did. Is that cool?
Sounds good. All right. I'll go with that.
Okay. Fair enough. I want to take a step back for just a second because there is an ability in the work that you have done and even the way that you communicate today that, again, I do believe is conditioned into us and sometimes for the sake of survival, right? Or just needs to adapt to our own environments when we're growing up, right?
Yes.
You talked about Navy going forward, but if you go back and you're honest with yourself about your early years, what about your childhood, the situations in it, do you believe prepared you to not only be able to read people and situations, but be able to adapt and regulate your emotions and language to fit within the environment you're in?
So, one of the things that you have to do as a cop is you have to be able to control how you feel. You have to be able to control your emotions. You have to sometimes be an actor. And I took acting classes. I took acting, well, not classes, but like as a subject in junior high. And that, you take all of your stuff, all of you, you're going to go out on stage, and me and one other guy had the lead for both years. So he had the lead in the fall play. I had the lead in the spring. The next year I had lead in the fall. He had lead in the spring, and we were good friends and hung out together. But that's one of the ones you have to learn how to be an actor, or and hide your emotions and present the emotions that you want, right? The emotions that have to be there, or turn them off. And a lot of people ask me, how do you do that? I said, look, I just turn it off. And they go, how do you turn it off? I don't know. I don't really know. But I just shut it off. And part of it, I think a lot of that is learning how to be an actor, learning how to, you step away from your own self. And what's interesting is you hear actors and actresses talk about what they're doing in a role. They're talking about the character, and they talk about that character in third person. Right. Well, that's the best way to do it, and authors and writers, they talk about the omnipresent person, and they're reading, they're talking about the scene, and you're writing about the scene as if they're over somebody's shoulder, seeing what's going on. It's that kind of thing. You have to be able to do that in order to survive this stuff. There's a lot of concern lately about officer suicide in law enforcement. And it's an issue. I wrote an article probably 2 weeks ago now about how we create psychological safety within the department, because there's no way you'd be able to create it outside the department. So I think a lot of that, I think our cops should take some kind of acting class. I think that would be cool. Yeah. But you have to do that. I think that was a big influence on, it's like, look, I'm just going to be who I have to be. As a matter of fact, one of my good friends, he used the term, you have to become who you need to become in order to handle the situation. And I think that is so true. Well, what are you doing if you do that? You're creating a character, you're being a person, and you're acting. Because otherwise, if you let all of this stuff get to you, it's not going to be good. There's no way you can deal with some of the things that people have to deal with in the law enforcement realm. Yeah. You see the worst of the worst, and then you have to go tell the, parents that their kid's dead. All that kind of stuff is terrible. Yeah. So you have to be able to turn it off. You have to be able to regulate that kind of stuff. And I think being able to step away mentally, emotionally, but then there has to be, and I'm realizing that now, after being retired for 15 years, that stuff stays with you.
It does.
Yeah. And so you have to be able to find some kind of safe place or safe space in order to share that, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why a lot of cops, they don't last very long after retirement. Because they've been eaten up, throughout their life.
And I think what's known, as much as I don't want to bash on any of the public services, is that first responders, right, whether it be fire or police, right, just like our military, they endure more regular trauma than most other categories of people, but they are not given the tools to understand how to regulate, but also how to heal and process and release the trauma when it is no longer needed in the body. And so then it turns into a bunch of other things, right? Yeah. And you know this because you've been working in it, but all of what you just talked about is very real. And yet at the same time, I think that it's important to focus on a couple things that jumped out to me, because I have a new good friend who was a 30-year well-known actor who's been teaching and coaching in the leadership space. And a lot of what he does is essentially improv, with leaders to get them to be able to embody different roles, characters, get into the moment and present. I talk about this idea that I believe there are trained speakers and there are effective communicators.
Right.
Right. And the trained speakers are typically, and I don't mean this just in professional speakers, but it's a performance. It's an act.
Yeah.
Right. And yet lots of people can go through the motions of acting and yet still not translate what they need to, because 55% of our communications in the nonverbals. So even if their face matches and their voice matches, their body and their energy do not.
Right. Right.
And so one of the things that I picked up on in the way you were talking is like, yeah, you've got to detach and you have to become who you are. But at the same time, when you're in the height of all of this chaos in these situations, and somebody in front of you, one, both needs help, but two, they're about to potentially do harm to themselves or others, right? Your nervous system is up here.
Yeah.
Right. And at the same time, even when you can regulate, even if you can act, there needs to be a level of truth and authenticity to fulfill the purpose and connect with the human.
Right.
And so how do you teach, or how do you embody that ability to connect with authenticity while also acting and playing the role that needs to be played in that moment?
I think that's why we do backgrounds in law enforcement, because you need to learn who that real person is, that authenticity. You don't want people who are in it for the wrong reasons. And I think that's what really gives you good cops on the street, is when they go through a rigorous testing. And that's what part of the training is for. That's part of the FTO process. Find out who they really are and make sure that they're not just BSing and they just want to have power. And
which I think is fair, Chris. Yeah. But I'm meaning, how do you do that in the field, right?
Yeah.
How did you do that actively in the field, and how do you teach people to do that? Because that embodiment is far beyond the performance, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I would do, I would just be me. Lean on my values, what I wanted to do, who I was. If somebody wanted to talk about God, let's talk about God. Somebody wants to talk about, whatever they want to talk about. It's hard when you get to dealing with somebody that goes against your values. But that's when you have to turn on the actor, right? I had one incident, a guy had given his kids venereal warts, and both of his kids, during molestations and rape, had given both of his kids, 7 and 9-year-old, a male and female. So, it's anyway. So as I'm sitting there talking to him, trying to get him to tell me, what he did, because it's basically their word against his, right? And he's talking about his kids, and I said, well, your daughter's cute. I could see how she could come on to you. And it'd be hard to, oh my God. In here, I'm lying to this guy. I'm telling him, yeah, I could see how she could come on to you. I could see how she would, it would be hard to fight that. And, and things just happen. And, try and be. That was one of the hardest interviews ever.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, viscerally, I feel that. That's a topic that, that would be very difficult to talk through.
And he told me, yeah, he did. And she did come on to him, and, he ended up having sex with her, and he told me all this stuff. And then I said, well, is that what happened with your son too? And he goes, well, no, that's different. And, I was trying to show him certain things and what men are really like. And so long story short, he got 22 years in state prison with no possibility of parole until he had to do all his 22 years, but his kids have to go a whole lifetime with that,
Yeah.
That one totally against every value that I have. And so you have to turn off the emotions, turn on the actor, be who you need to be to handle the situation.
Thank you for sharing that story. I mean, I could even hear and feel the emotion that you still carry, not only about that, but I'm sure of the thousands of cases and people that you impacted. I mean, you felt that, and that was raw very beginning in the conversation. As I hear you say, adapt to who you need to be, I know this sounds silly as a comparison, but it's also not, and you'll see why. But just the other day, my cat did something that, and I'm not a cat person by nature. I've learned to like cats because it was one of the things I negotiated to marry my wife. Cats were non-negotiable in my world if I wanted her in my world. Right. Yeah. And so I had my stern voice for just a second, like, hey, get off. And she goes, no, you just got to sweet talk him. If you just sweet talk him and make him think that you're going to, right. Which is interesting because I do that in situations with people that I need to. And the same thing sometimes with children, right? As a father, it's like, right. I need to play a role, but I still need to be real.
Yeah.
How did your expertise and service as, a hostage negotiations team on the homicide team, when your ability to understand people and really learn both influence and persuasion, where did that benefit you as a father, and where did that make things difficult as a father?
Wow. A benefit as a father, I was able to, when my kids got into trouble or kids had things happen. My middle son, who's now an emergency nurse, I'm super proud of. Sorry.
Never apologize for the emotion you feel about your kids or anything, my friend.
He got into a lot of trouble. Not super bad trouble, but bad enough that, the police were going to arrest him. And I couldn't do anything to stop it, nor did I want to, because he was being a jerk. I look at my own job and he's doing things against what I want, what my values are, right?
Yeah.
And so I knew for 2 days, my wife and I both knew for 2 days that they had this warrant for his arrest and that they were waiting for him. And they told me, and I asked the lieutenant, I said, hey boss, look, if he becomes a jerk when he gets arrested and, can I arrest him? Because if he's going to be a jerk, I want to be the one to kick his ass,
Yeah.
So, and he goes, no. So,
yeah.
That kind of thing. And then, there was another time when, the same son, but he was 4 years old at the time. He's out riding his bike, bicycle, as little, jeans and t-shirt and, And so I have to go handle a fatal collision. I get called from home to go handle this fatal collision. Well, it was a vehicle versus a child on a bicycle, or a vehicle versus a child. It was vehicle ped. Well, the child was walking across a crosswalk, and the guy that hit him, he was in a lifted truck. And when the kid stepped out, because of the lifted truck, he actually couldn't see that kid. Yeah. And so, now I get there at the scene and there's this little bicycle. There's a pair of jeans. There's some shoes. And then there's the blood. So I told the boss then, said, I can't handle this. I can't handle this wreck. I'll hold the dumb end of the tape. I'll do whatever you need me to do. But I don't want to be the one to have to go to the hospital. I don't want to be the one to have to deal with the kids. I'll do everything else. I'll do the mechanicals, stuff that I don't even like doing. I'll do that stuff. And then when I got home, because the pants and the shoes were exactly the same kind as my kid had, the bicycle was basically the same model, the same kind of bicycle, same size, same color. And I got home. When I got home, he's still out riding his bicycle outside. We had this great street that you could just, the kids would just play, right?
Yeah.
And I got home and I yelled at him. I said, put your bike away and go inside. And my wife says, why? Why are you doing that? So I had to tell her why. That was so hard. But that's why I went after, people that speed, people that, they don't, all those things, because they don't realize what they're doing. They don't realize that they're driving a 2,500 pound bullet. They don't realize that they're one little action and that kind of thing happens. And now, I'm just glad I didn't have to deal with that mother. That was a tough one. So, but sometimes you have to just tell people, I can't do it. This is too much for me. You know, and I was thankful that my boss at the time, my boss says, I get it. You know, okay, you hold the dumb end of the tape, you know, and take measurements, and all I have to do is stand there. So I was happy with that, you know. But that's the thing is you have to be able to regulate your emotions while you're doing the job. You have to recognize it's just like in the book Crucial Conversations. You know, high stakes, high energy, that kind of stuff. You know, you have to recognize your limitations. You have to understand your triggers, what's going to set you off. And so knowing that and learning that kind of stuff, especially after going back to school and getting the master's and bachelor's and master's in org leadership, recognizing all these things, and I started seeing all this stuff, how this applied to law enforcement.
Yeah.
So being able to put those things together is crazy. And you just have to do it.
So Chris, I thank you for your vulnerability so far in this discussion. I've said this more than once, and yet my actions are going to look a little different because you said a number of things that were more relevant to me than you realize, and I want to reflect it back in a way that you understand, even to the point of understanding triggers and the patterns and how it shows up in our lives and how to be able to use it and move with it. In 2021, I was faced head on with realizing that my shame and anger that I had not dealt with for years, that I didn't even know existed, was about to make me lose everyone and everything in my world. Mm-hmm. My wife, primarily, right? It would come out in moments of reaction because I was getting defensive on things that weren't even what she said to me.
Right.
And so the motivation I had at that moment to shift became very profound. I'm proud to say today it's even a part of my story. It's one of the ways I teach, but even our Ways to Wealth methodology that we teach, which is involving trigger mapping and understanding how to move in these motions and really like do the work to unpack the stuff that we're still protecting from years ago in moments that we don't even see. It all came from the work I had to do in that. But why I bring this full circle is 3 days after we had that conversation, on the way back from dropping off my kids, I ran into a pedestrian accident where there was a child on the ground. And it put me into a panic attack. And the reason it put me into a panic attack, you may not know the background of my story, but when I was 7, I was run over by a truck and my left arm was torn from my body.
Yeah.
Me witnessing it in that moment and experiencing all of the things that I did connected dots that gave me the clarity to now not only have saved my marriage, have my kids not believe that I'm an angry dad. They don't even remember me as an angry dad, but also to understand all the stuff that was still hurting inside and still painful that I needed to take care of so it didn't come out on other people. And I shared that with you simply and only because the amount of emotion and heart that you speak with everything with, it's difficult to not feel the depth and intensity, both with which you felt it, but that the impact that you've made in your life.
Yeah.
And so thank you. I'm going to challenge you to answer this question slightly differently though.
Okay.
I asked you to help me understand how the professional job helped you or hurt you as a father. And both examples you gave me were job examples, when in fact I was actually meaning as a father. Why do I say this? Because I'm a very good negotiator and I very much believe in advocating for myself. What does that mean though? My 10 and 11-year-old are very good negotiators and they advocate very well for themselves. And it's led to very interesting discussions that most kids may or may not face. I would have to believe that with the heart you lead with, the level of communication and access to communication that you've had and had to have, that you've had situations as a father that have left your head spinning and also been like very proud at the same moment.
Yeah.
So that's what I wanted to hone in on is your first and primary role as a father. How did your work that you got paid for that supported your whole family and vision, how did that influence your relationship with your kids, your ability to raise them? What monsters did you create that you're also very proud of in some sense? If that makes, you follow what I'm asking now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I tend to say that I wasn't a good dad from the beginning because work came first, you know,
Okay.
and so I should have, would have spent more time with my kids. The job kind of influenced that, you know, you have to go to court on certain days. You have to, and again, this isn't just me. This is almost every law enforcement officer out there. And the job takes you away on situations that are not the best. You come home and you're angry.
Yeah.
because you've had to deal with that, or you're sad, or, your 6-year-old daughter runs up to you, "Hey, Daddy, let's go outside and play." And you go, "No, I just need to go sit." Right?
Yeah.
Kevin Gilmartin, Dr. Gilmartin has a great book about that. It's called Emotional Survival. And he talks about how that influences everything. And it really is true. Everything in his book I've experienced. It may seem incongruent to your kids,
Yeah.
Well, my daddy's home. I want to spend time with him, and he doesn't want to be here, or like that time with my son. You go home, put your bike away, go in the house, go inside the house. He's having a blast. Leave
And
him
he has
alone,
no idea why. Yep. Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
So it's those kind of things that, and a lot of families, that's why a lot of law enforcement, they get together and marry law enforcement. If they're married to somebody that's non-law enforcement, they don't really understand. And there is that level of understanding. So, but with my kids, with my family, I with my oldest, I absent. And then with the middle two, that involved divorce. And so I only dealt with them like half the time. My youngest, I think I got 90% right. Because, it was, plus it was towards the end of my career where I had more time. You have more vacation. You have more, even though I was dealing with all this other stuff, I was also in charge, and I didn't have to, do some of the work that you end up having to do. Right. And so that was easier with him as my youngest. Plus there was an age spread between the middle one and the youngest one. So I feel like each set of kids, I don't know, that doesn't sound right, does it? But each I guess group of the kids.
Well, you had different seasons with kids. How about that? Different seasons with kids.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I actually learned from everything the others had gone through and tried to go, okay, I got to do this right this time, because I didn't really think that I had it right.
So it's obvious to me, and I guess I know you've said nothing is off limits, but I did not ask you this before the show, and I believe that feedback is always permission based. Do I have permission to reflect something back to you?
Yeah, please do.
The first thing I say when I say this, I haven't done this on the show in a little while, so I give this caveat both for you and for those that are listening. And Chris, I've got respect for you. And so what I want to start with is I don't give a fuck about being right. I care about getting it right.
Yeah.
So if anything I say doesn't land, throw it back at me. Like I've got nothing to argue or prove. Yeah. It's if and only if it helps you. Is that fair?
Yep, that's fair.
Okay. I'm going to say a very bold statement. If there's one place that I would love to encourage you to spend some time and some energy, it's to forgive yourself. You're carrying a lot of shame and a lot of guilt for a lot of things that you can no longer change or influence. And yet you did them to the best of your ability at the time, given what you knew then and what you had at your fingertips.
Yeah.
And the way you live your life every day and have for so much of your life and the impact that you've had, you deserve the grace of the fact that, guess what? We all wish we could have changed certain things in our life. But my friend, I can feel the weight that you're still carrying, both as a father and in your professional work, where you feel you could have done more. You wished you could have done more. You wished you could have saved that extra life in those situations. But instead, I hope you can learn to focus on all the lives that you have changed and impacted in a way that you allow yourself to see the result of some of the hard parts as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think I do. I think I'm learning how.
That's fair.
The Navy would have been so much easier because then I could just tool around the world. No. But I know that is a challenge. It's a challenge for me, especially, I'm one of those people that has the imposter syndrome pretty bad. Because no matter what accolades there may be, I still think I could do more, do better. Right.
Yeah.
So that imposter syndrome is there.
And I like to say that imposters don't have imposter syndrome. Right. And you know this, working with sociopaths in your profession, they literally don't feel the remorse. It's not even wired that way.
Right.
And so if you feel imposter syndrome, it actually means that you're more humble than most. And on the flip side of that as well, I think I'm somebody who learned to receive love, validation, and connection through performance, which meant it was always contingent on what I did. But that also was a part of my shame is, there were moments of self-worth, but I knew I was good.
Yeah.
Right. And I think you do too. But to the other side of it, it's like every time I got acknowledgement, everything I ever did, anything major, every time I broke down that piece and I showed up in the arena and did something, it was, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are to experience? I felt the need to apologize for all the good I was having, which then it's like, what am I doing it for? If I just feel shittier when I get words of encouragement, and I think that's my love language, but it makes me feel shittier about myself. Like I say this with love and encouragement because I also know, just because of what I know in working with mental health, as well as a lot of first responders and people in your work, you've encountered a lot of trauma in your life.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of this stuff that all contributes. And so I love to hear that you say you're learning.
Yeah.
All I'm suggesting is I hope you find a place to come to some resolution because you deserve the peace. Yeah. And yet that doesn't mean you're not still getting better every day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've gotten to the place where I know that it's never going to be gone. You know, it's like being an alcoholic. You're always an alcoholic. Being whatever. It's never going to be gone, but I've learned to cope with it, learned to deal with it. And then, this thing we talk about, this trauma, there is a thing called cumulative trauma.
There is.
And we really need to understand that happens.
It does.
So that's why this safe place, finding a safe place within the walls of the police department, because you never find it outside. That you go, all of our military, all of our law enforcement, all of our military, all the emergency workers, emergency service workers, even, like my son is an emergency room nurse, even they deal with this cumulative trauma.
A lot.
And so we need to understand that that's a real thing and treat it just as much as we treat everything else.
I completely agree.
Yeah. You get a heart problem, you go to a cardiologist, and they try to work with you to get it. So we need to also give people a break from having to deal with that all the time.
I completely agree. And, you called it psychological safety earlier, right?
Yeah.
The importance of training that. Yes, it's psychological safety, but you and I both know that that's what also makes it accessible to people to tolerate talking about it, because what's underneath psychological safety is emotional safety.
Right.
And if we don't have emotional safety, everything else goes out the window.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we know this in dealing with anybody. I mean, as soon as anxiety hits, guess what? Reason, executive functioning, all of it goes.
Correct.
And so it's both, right? It's both giving the space to help people have that space, but also the tools to help them learn to move through it.
Right.
Again, and thank you for allowing me to just even reflect that little bit of love back to you, because you've saved, no doubt, many more lives than I know you sometimes hold yourself accountable for not being able to save. And I hope that you can receive that. One of the things that I really like, and we talked about the power of questions in my own world, but you had written down on one of our intake forms that though you believe you're a late bloomer, I'm sure that's that imposter syndrome kicking in again, right? You said you like to view things differently than others because you question most everything. Would you say that's skepticism or curiosity? And where did that skill set develop?
So I think it's more curiosity. And I've always thought about things. I remember at age, 5, 6 years old in a Catholic, school, right? 5 years old or 6 years old, I think, in the Catholic school. And we're going into the church, and, the priest has to do this, and it's like, why do they do that? Why are we having, and so I've always questioned things. There was also a time in 10th grade where, my instructor in a history class, he says, we go there, and my mom's in there because she was, coming in for the parent teacher conference thing. And the instructor says, Chris doesn't, he doesn't take any notes. He doesn't, he's just doodling in class. And my mom goes, really? And he goes, yeah, well, here, I have one of his doodles, because he took it from me right before, and it was a whole page. So he shows it to my mom, and she goes, "Chris, what is this?" I said, well, this is when he was talking about, and I explained all the things he talked about in that class by those pictures that I was drawing. And so, that helps me think. And so you're using left side, right side brain. And there's, the people who are very artistic, but yet can be very down to earth, do that. And I think that that's what happened. And then there was, when I went to my psychological exam to be a cop, right? I get the Rorschach test, right? They show you the ink blots.
Yep.
So I look at the ink blot and he says, okay, what do you see? So I gave an answer, and then I turned it. And I gave another answer, and I turned it. I gave another answer. I turned it. I gave another answer. And then I looked on the back, and he failed me because he couldn't score it. But then I've learned years later, the chief says that's how brilliant. I want people to be investigating. Yeah. They look at things different ways.
Every perspective. Right. Yeah.
And so, like I said, I always believe that I look at things differently. I think the law enforcement world made me be a little more, jaded, sarcastic, cynical, etc. But I don't think I've ever lost that idea of looking at things differently, because it's just a natural thing for me. Is you're kind of like the dog that you hear something and they kind of tilt their head sideways. Yeah. I tilt my head sideways at a lot of things. It's like, why do we do that? Why does the news say 4 million people impacted with this storm? Well, what about the other 331 million people who aren't impacted by that storm? Yeah.
I love the way you think, and I believe that power of perspective is a really important thing in everything. I mean, it's even your ability to be successful in the roles that you did, because you've got to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
Otherwise, how do you know what role to play and the act to play, right?
Right.
Some would suggest, I spent 15 years in risk management and employee benefits consulting. So I've worked with a lot of risk managers, HR managers, and that's a role that you even play today at the district attorney's office. And in some ways, you could argue that being an HR manager is pretty similar to being a hostage negotiator in different respects, because you are dealing with conflict resolution and communication and employee retention and engagement and a whole variety of other components. And so maybe I would ask that same type of lens. It's like, hey, what did the first 30 years of your professional career enable you to be able to do successfully in a business or HR manager type role in a large political organization?
Yeah. Well, I would first say that sometimes I feel like the hostage. So I mean, you have to follow the policies. You have to do what you have to do, but and don't want to be here, don't want to be in this situation, but I have to be here, that kind of thing. So sometimes I do feel like the hostage, but I think it's prepared me for this, because it is political. You have to be aware of what the outside world sees and thinks, and especially for the person who's elected, because any little thing can just derail stuff. And so you have to try and think ahead. You have to be ready for that. You have to have a backup plan, just like in police work. You anticipate the possibilities, you act on the probabilities, you have a backup plan, you think ahead, what would I do if, right? And so that's what I do here. And I don't have to be out chasing people. I don't have to get my car ready and worry about people coming at me and stuff. But you still have all the threats, the social threats that happen. And people don't like being told what to do. As a business manager and an HR manager, those two things do not work together. I can tell you that I've had discussions with my boss about this. As the business manager, I'm up on the wagon, whipping the horses, saying, "Yeah, get up." And then as the HR manager, I'm down hugging each horse, saying, "It's okay. He's not really a mean guy."
Huh? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So those two roles really kind of conflict, and it's difficult, but I think my career, the law enforcement career, prepared me for that, because I don't mind taking charge. I don't mind pulling the trigger if I have to. I really, and sometimes, as an HR manager, I just don't care. I don't care what happens to that person because they've brought on their own
Correct.
issues, just like in law enforcement. People cause their own issues. I'm not causing it. They're causing it. And how they place blame or credit, that's on them, And I don't take any of that personal. When I get done at the end of the day, I'm done at the end of the day.
Yeah. You obviously have been very open so far in this interview, and you talked about being retired for 15 years from law enforcement. You're obviously doing this type of work now, but you've also written 3 books in that time.
Yeah.
And you obviously are going out and doing things in a way that's creating impact, both in leadership trainings and speaking and podcasts and otherwise. And so, you've got your day job, as you call it, right? In some respects, but then you still have this purpose and this drive and this mission. And so, Chris, what is the goal for impact? What is the legacy that you're trying to leave? What's the mark that you're focused on creating right now in the world with all of your actions?
Well, I think the majority of it is I want people to understand that whether you're leading or following it, your behavior is more important than anything else. Behavior is what caused people to get involved, as a cop. Behavior is what got them in trouble. Their choices of the behavior, and we had to deal with that. And so you have to learn how to deal with behavior. All of my books are behavior based, and every single one is about one is how to create behavior. One is how to mitigate bad behavior or, behavior you don't want. And then one is how to evaluate behavior. And so, and I kind of wrote them backwards too. But that's the main thing is that, and I like to say that I'm more of a behavior-based leadership coach, consultant than anything else because all of it is behavior-based and
every bit of it.
That's what changes who we are to other people.
100%.
Yeah.
One of the things I say often in our talks, and it was something that I learned through the interactions with my anger and my wife, is that the world will never judge you based on your intent. The world will only ever judge you based on what your words, actions, and behaviors communicate.
Right.
And so if you don't like the outcomes you're getting or you feel like you're not being understood, then you got to reflect in the mirror and say, what are my words, actions, and behaviors actually communicating to the world, even if you're not conscious to it?
Right.
Because that's what most people don't do is take the level of personal responsibility for the fact that even if their intent is aligned, if their words, actions, or behaviors do not, they won't be trusted, they won't be believed, and it will be rejected.
Yeah.
And they will not get where they want to go. Everything is at the root of human behavior, which is also why almost everything is at the root of creating emotional safety so that natural, authentic behavior can exist.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I do in my trainings is I take a pen, a marking pen, and I ask for a volunteer and they come up and I say, okay, I'm going to toss this pen to you and please catch it because last time I hit somebody in the head. So it creates a little fear. And so I say, okay, you ready? And they go, yeah, I'm ready. I say, okay, you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. So I'm giving it. And then I go like this, but I don't toss the pen. And they've gotten ready. And then I go, okay, all right. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm not going to toss the pen at you. And then I underhand the pen towards them and they have to react. They have to do something. So then I get the pen back. And now I say, okay, now what do you expect? And they said, I don't know what to expect. Because you've been incongruent 2 times. One time you said you're going to throw it and you didn't. The other time you said you weren't going to throw it and you did. So I don't know what to expect. And then I asked him, what are you watching now? So I'm watching the pen. Because the pen is the only thing that's the danger. Because they don't want to get hit in the head.
Unbelievable analogy.
Right. And so, and then I said, that's what we're doing to our students. That's what we're doing to our employees every single time. Because if we're not congruent, we don't do what we say we're going to do, or we do what we say we're not going to do.
Yeah.
We're incongruent and then they're on edge. And that's what we need to get rid of. That behavior as a leader and as a follower, we need to get rid of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful example. I believe we learn physically first, and that sometimes is also with what we witness in those types of analogies. And whenever people can effectively facilitate something like that, it moves the whole room because it's so fucking obvious, even though we don't pay attention to how obvious it is in our normal everyday.
Right.
I love that analogy and thank you for sharing it. My friend, as we start to wrap up towards the end of this conversation, because I've really enjoyed our time together, and I know I could keep talking to you, but I want to respect your time and everything. Is there a closing message that you want to leave everybody with? We're going to be putting all of your book links and everything within the show notes. But if you look back at being a cancer survivor, all the work that you've done, the work that you do today, the way that you believe and operate, and your focus particularly around human behavior, what do you want people to listen to, hear, and take away the most?
That it's about the behavior. How they treat people is important. Because that's bottom line. We're social creatures. We live in a society. We're even work as social creatures. We need to treat people better.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Chris Fuzie, for your time today. It's been a real pleasure having a conversation with you, and thank you for all the knowledge and heart you brought.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah. And for those of you that watch Dr. Chris flip his lid, obviously sometimes life just happens and we have to adapt and adjust to the change. But we also can start to learn more about ourselves when we pay attention to those moments when we realized where we're different, where we're strong, and how we are unique. But at the end of the day, whether we're overly focused in one area of a life or another, there is a ripple effect into all of it. And yet we can celebrate the wins that we've had while still sometimes holding on to the wins we could get back. But at the end of the day, no matter what we do, it's about understanding how do we heal the trauma that we absorb day to day, whether it's a big T or a little T trauma. How do we create those spaces for ourselves and each other? And how do we meet people where they are? At the end of the day, he landed hardest after the close and tail of this conversation, which is that behavior is everything. And so as I always say, the world will never judge you based on your intent. The world will only judge you based on what your behavior communicates. And Dr. Chris brought that to light in all of his work. You too can create that freedom. You too can create that healing, and you too can create that impact, but it will require you to flip open your lid and scan your can. We'll see you guys next time.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.